Good afternoon, this is Field Safety Technician Eric Gardner, and I made this video to touch on a few safety topics important for all employees to be familiar with. First, we're going to review a daily chemical that some of you may become exposed to in the near future or exposed to now. First, we're going to look at some of the daily amounts and values of bromine in the workplace. The first value we see is the permissible exposure limit. This limit is set by the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, also known as OSHA. As we can see, the permissible exposure limit is 0.1 parts per million for bromine. The next value we're going to take a look at is the recommended exposure limit. This exposure limit is set by the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health. As we can see, the recommended exposure limit is 0.3 parts per million for bromine. The last but not least limit we're going to look at is a threshold limit value. This limit was set by American Conference of Governmental Industry Hygienists. As we can see, the threshold limit value for bromine is 0.2 parts per million. Next for bromine, we're going to look at the routes of entry. These are the ways you can be affected or exposed to the chemical. First, we can see one route of entry is oral. The next is inhalation. Then dermal, eye, and parenteral. For oral and parenteral, these routes of entries are unknown. But for inhalation, you can see that this can happen between accidental spiral leak during transportation and manufacturing. For dermal, during an accidental spiral leak during transportation and manufacturing and improper handling or use of protective equipment, also known as PPE. And then lastly, eye, during an accidental spiral leak during transportation or improper handling or use of protective equipment. Next, we're going to look at the IDLH, also known as immediately dangerous to life or health concentrations. For bromine, as you can see, I won't read everything word from word, but we can see 10 parts per million and above causes severe upper respiratory irritation. Next, we can see that 0.75 parts per million causes no symptoms in 6 hours. But 4 parts per million has been recommended as the maximum concentration allowable for 0.5 to 1 hour, with 40 to 60 parts per million being dangerous for brief exposures. If you continue reading, we can find that it has been reported that 1.7 to 3.5 parts per million can produce severe choking. 4.5 to 9 ppm is extremely dangerous, and 30 ppm will prove fatal in just a short period of time. Moving on from the daily chemical bromine, we are now going to look at the medical surveillance for asbestos. This is also something you guys might come in contact with in the near future or might just be exposed to now in the workspace. First, you can see the employer shall institute a medical surveillance program for all employees who are employed and are exposed to asbestos. They must be examined by a physician before an employee is assigned and exposed to the concentration. A pre-placement medical examination shall be provided or made available by the employer. Next, lists everything the examination shall include. and these medical examinations should be conducted annually. Continuing on with medical surveillance for asbestos, you can also see the employer should establish and maintain an accurate record for each employee subject to medical surveillance by paragraph. And this record should include at least, at the minimum, the following: the name and social security number of the employee, physician written opinions, any employee medical complaints related to exposure in asbestos, a copy of the information provided to the physician as required by paragraph L6 of this section. The employer should ensure that this record is maintained for the duration of employment, plus 30 years, in accordance with 29 CFR 1910-1020. Lastly, we'll take a very brief look at the indoor air quality and CO2 guidance thresholds. CO2, carbon dioxide, is a byproduct of combustion, as well as a result of the metabolic process in living organisms. Because of these facts, we can use carbon dioxide as an indicator whether adequate fresh air is being supplied to the space. Being an odorless and colorless gas, CO2 is one of the most dangerous compounds in indoor environment. The American Conference of Governmental Industrial Hygienists has given a threshold limit value of 25 ppm for an 8-hour workday, while the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health has estimated a recommended exposure limit of 35 ppm.